All right. Hello, hello, everybody. Can you all hear me and see me without any issues? Excellent. Good. So I hope you're all doing well today. I'm feeling a lot better. It was a real drag having to cancel that lecture. But I was certainly in no shape uh, to deliver a lecture last Wednesday, although I am feeling much better now. So, today what we'll be doing, once I get my slideshow up and running here, today what we will be doing is making up for the material that we would have covered on Wednesday. So it's this lecture that I've put together for some reason. There we go. A sort of introduction and orientation lecture to well, the paranormal, the anomalous, a little bit of parapsychology, a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of scientific skepticism. Basically, things that I think you'll need for this class to follow along with how I do things. Some of this stuff will be familiar to you already if you are a philosophy major, or if you have read some philosophy on your own, right? Maybe you're not a philosophy major, but you're just interested in it. Maybe you'll have read about some of the thinkers that we'll cover today. And if you are a philosophy major, hopefully some of this will serve as a nice refresher and reminder for some fundamental ideas that, well, are good to know if you're a philosopher, good to keep sharp, but also that will specifically concern us with some of the things in this course. So I've entitled this The Philosopher's Guide to the Anomalous. I will explain what I mean by anomalous as we proceed. So just to go back to a little bit from the course outline. Remember that what we're doing here is critically examining claims, concepts, and theories that are related to the paranormal. And, well, what is the paranormal? As I said last time, the paranormal refers to phenomena that are outside of the realm of everyday experience and or scientific explanation. So we're going to be using an interdisciplinary approach here, not just a philosophical approach, but will include elements from psychology and some of the other cognitive sciences. We'll be looking at, well, next week, for goodness sake, we're looking at some literature, some Gothic literature for one of our readings. So that will be fun, right? So we're going to get very interdisciplinary, and our aim here is to examine the scientific and philosophical character of paranormal phenomena. And also, and this is where we get really philosophical, um, to explore the relation of these phenomena, were they to exist? Were they real? Um, to explore what the relation between these phenomena would be um, to questions concerning everything from human nature, thinking, perception, how we understand the world. Um, and when I say we're going to critically examine all of this, what I mean is that we are going to take a skeptical approach. And I just want to be clear about what this means, right? I talked a little bit last time about how, in this class we have um, believers and skeptics, and probably also a good number of people who are somewhat agnostic about all of this, right? But we do have skeptics, which nowadays I think when we hear skeptic, we think of a doubter, right? And we have believers, people who believe in the reality of some of the phenomena that we'll examine here. But it's this idea that skepticism means doubt or dismissal that I'd like to immediately dispel. Skepticism, you could probably have a whole class on philosophical skepticism, a whole course, I mean, right? And certainly somebody's doing that somewhere. That's not what we're doing here. But there's a lot we could say about skepticism and what it is. Skepticism originally comes from this Greek word skepsis, which means to investigate. And in the ancient world, in ancient Greece, There were sort of two veins of skepticism, I suppose. One gets sort of reinvigorated or rediscovered in the early modern period, thanks to thinkers like Rene Descartes. And that's Pyrrhonian skepticism, which is due to an ancient Greek thinker called Pyrrho, right? Another sort of ancient skeptical tradition can be found in Plato, actually. And that's associated with Plato's academy, with Plato's students, and that's called academic skepticism. And that generally I think I think it's nicely reflected in Socrates's little dictum, like if I'm the wisest of men. Of course, this all depends on what translation you're reading, right? But Socrates at his trial in ancient Athens, when he was charged with impiety and with corrupting the youth, uh, in the course of this trial, it's brought up that this oracle at a place called Delphi had told Socrates' friend Chaerephon that, oh, your friend Socrates is the wisest of men, and Socrates, you're clearly a sophist, a wise guy. You know, everyone says you're the wisest of men. What's up with that? And Socrates kind of responds to this accusation of sophistry by saying that, if I'm the wisest of men, it's because I know that I know not. So on academic skepticism, there's kind of like only one thing you can know. You can believe lots of things, but there's one thing you can know, and that is that you can't know anything else with certainty. Pyrrhonian skepticism is a little more radical, right? We can have all kinds of beliefs, but maybe none of them really rise to the standard that is required for knowledge. Sometimes you'll also hear this called global skepticism, right? This is how I teach it in my mind, world, and knowledge class, for example. But the original meaning of skepsis is just to inquire or to investigate. Um, Over time, I think maybe this is a result of Descartes. It's kind of got an association with just doubting because Descartes uses methodological doubt in his meditations, for example, his meditations on first philosophy. But the original meaning is to inquire. So we will be inquiring, honestly inquiring, into the nature of these paranormal phenomena and their relation to, those aforementioned questions concerning perception, thought, reality, human nature, free will, whatever you want. So yeah, just want to reiterate, we're investigating, we're not, by critically examining, we mean we're investigating. We're not doubting or dismissing. I think that's important so that we all get off on the right foot together, right? But what about the paranormal as phenomena that lie outside of the realm of everyday experience or scientific explanation? Well, and this is maybe kind of what I'd like you to talk about a little bit in your first reflection assignment, which I'll say something about toward the end of this lecture today. Um, your experience with it, if you have any experience with it, would be a good thing to talk about. But I realize that not all of you will have had an experience with what some people might characterize as the paranormal. Because one of the ways in which the paranormal lies outside of everyday experience is that it's unusual, right? These things don't just happen every day. Um, a lot of the time, when we talk about some paranormal occurrence, it's not something that's happened to us. It's something we've heard about. I remember when I was young in elementary school, and the elementary school library contained numerous books, with titles like Unexplained Phenomena or Unsolved Mysteries, right? I think there's a television show called Unsolved Mysteries, which deals with the paranormal sometimes, right? It's been rebooted. It's on Netflix now. It used to be on network television. Now its sequel series, its spiritual successor, whatever you want to call it, is on Netflix, and it's kind of half unsolved crimes, like true crime stuff, and half paranormal stuff. One episode it will be like who murdered this person, and then the next episode will be about like the Mothman or alien abductions or something, right? So, um, it's outside of the realm of everyday experience because these things are unusual. So again, yeah, the kind of thing you'd see in a book or on television, one of these unsolved mystery type um, books or TV shows, which deal with, some more or less mundane stuff like crimes or disappearances, but also about stuff that we would call paranormal, ghosts, aliens, strange creatures like, cryptids, um, unexplained events. Again, a lot of disappearances, a lot of mysterious disappearances, even though they probably have completely mundane explanations, are sometimes caught up in that, the paranormal sort of thing, right? Like the Bermuda Triangle, would be a famous example of that. Yeah, if you're excited about cryptids, well, keep in mind we have our special topics lectures. And if you guys want to hear about cryptids, I've got a really good Bigfoot lecture for you. Um, so not only are these things unusual in terms of their occurrence, but they're also somewhat mysterious, somewhat odd, somewhat strange. Um, do I have fun facts about Tsuchinokos? I'm afraid not. This is the first time I'm hearing that term. Fern, do you want to tell us a little more about that? What is that? Is that some kind of creature? By the way, I don't mind if you have questions or comments as we go. Feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. Right, there are only about 37 people here, so there's actually um, room for some discussion, when the occasion arises. So looks like a lot of people, while Fern is looking for a picture, I think a lot of people, unfortunately, are going to be watching this after the fact rather than participating live. But there's always a silver lining. So if there are fewer people here, maybe we can get into some, interesting discussions about what we're learning. So while we're waiting for a picture, yeah, um, the paranormal is mysterious, strange, weird, unusual, uncommon, right? That's the sense in which it lies outside of everyday experience. But what about scientific explanation? How does it lie outside of scientific explanation? Well, one idea is that science, at least as of yet, cannot explain paranormal phenomena. So, I guess my go-to example here would be something like UFOs, or what are more and more commonly termed UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. We used to call them UFOs, unidentified flying objects. But it's not immediately apparent that these phenomena that we observe in the sky are in fact objects or that they are flying, right? One of the most commonly reported UFOs, if I can still use that term, is in fact the planet Venus. Why should that be? Well, the planet Venus is the brightest object in the night sky after the moon. Um, it appears, depending on when you're looking, either in the morning or in the evening. It's one of the first things you see in the evening sky or the morning sky, um, or one of the last things you see in the morning sky. And I guess its appearance in morning or evening, again, depending on time of year, where the Earth and Venus are relative to one another, The fact that it's a planet, a wanderer, means that I guess people misidentify it for some kind of flying object, like an alien spacecraft. Another one is Sirius, the star Sirius, which twinkles a lot. Again, very commonly misidentified as a UFO, but we can explain these. But maybe you see something else in the sky, something that is a flying craft of some kind. Maybe it's terrestrial in origin. Maybe it's actually aliens. Um, Science is certainly not, um, it's not like the possibility of alien life is out of the question for most mainstream astronomers, right? It's very likely that somewhere out there is alien life. Is it visiting us in spaceships? That claim we have to be a little bit more skeptical of. But if we were to learn that, we could, in principle, if these are alien spacecraft, perhaps identify them as such and understand them a little bit better. Right. So it's not like science cannot explain the paranormal, but maybe it can't explain certain paranormal phenomena yet. Oh, here's a picture. A short, fat snake. Oh, a short, fat snake. Oh, weird. That's a weird looking snake. That looks like a snake that has eaten something. Yeah, interesting. I've never seen that. Although when snakes bite their own tail, some snakes do this. Um, I'm not really sure the reason why they do it. But oh, there's my slideshow. But that maybe is an inspiration for the Ouroboros, the snake devouring its own tail. You see this represented. You see this represented in artwork from around the world and lots of different cultures. Um, hmm. Okay, so they have festivals where they go out looking for this stuff in Japan. Interesting. Yeah. Hmm. Japan has some interesting cryptids, by the way, like the kappa, which is probably just a giant salamander, right? But it's inspired myths of these weird amphibious creatures that eat children and whatnot. Another example comes from parapsychology. Another example of, this idea that there's something going on, paranormally speaking, and science cannot yet explain it, but one day we will. Um, Parapsychology kind of grew. I'll talk about this in more detail as we proceed, but parapsychology sort of grew out of spiritualism and the spiritualist research or the psychical research that was going on in Great Britain and in the United States in the late 19th century. Parapsychology was sort of an effort to make this area of study more scientific. It didn't really work, but one of the underlying assumptions was that there are real phenomena like real sort of psychical forces, and we just don't understand them yet. So that's the idea, right? Parapsychology changed a lot of the terminology. One of the changes they made was changing psychical to psi, right? Psychical nowadays has an almost exclusively spiritualist connotation to it. Like if I say to you psychic, you probably think of like a psychic medium, somebody who's going to uh put you in touch with a deceased relative or tell your fortune or read your aura or something, right? But psychic used to just mean mental, right? Um and the terms were kind of used interchangeably for a long time. Now it's not so much like that now, but you will see this when you read Ernst Jentsch's essay on the uncanny for next time. Jentsch talks about um, psychical uncertainty as the condition under which these uncanny sensations arise. And what he means is mental or intellectual uncertainty. He doesn't mean anything supernatural or paranormal, right? So parapsychologists changed this. They focus less on the psychical and more on psi, which refers to things like extrasensory perception, right? Now, I don't want to rain on anyone's parade, but parapsychology has been largely discredited. It's very much a defunct discipline. There are still parapsychologists around, but they tend not to call themselves that anymore. You'll get people like Rupert Sheldrake, who founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences. What are noetic sciences? Well, basically parapsychology. Um, on the more scientific side of things, parapsychology has kind of been replaced with anomalistic psychology, although anomalistic psychology does not seem to have caught on like parapsychology did. Um, Anomalistic psychology we can just think of as a regular old sub branch of psychology, where we study anomalous psychological states. Um, but we do so, um, we try to explain these states without having our explanations violate any of the limiting principles of naturalism. And again, I'll say a lot more about this. I know I'm throwing a lot of terms at you, right? So I'll say more about what naturalism is. What do I mean by an anomalous psychological state? I mean, basically, what is meant by an anomalous state is something that, well, it's like the paranormal, something that is outside of everyday experience, and something that maybe we don't at present fully understand scientifically. So an anomalous psychological event might be something like having an ostensibly precognitive dream, right? So you have a dream, you dream of something happening, and then it happens, right? Or maybe something even as simple as deja vu. Some might call that an anomalous psychological state. Believing that you have received information or sent information telepathically, right, might be anomalous. Um, all kinds of things like that, right? But anomalistic psychology assumes that these phenomena, if they are actual phenomena, have a naturalistic explanation. Parapsychology doesn't really do that. Parapsychology violates the limiting principles of naturalism and posits effects, forces, etc., for which there is not really a natural basis, right? But of course, we're not just concerned with the science here, we're concerned with philosophy. Maybe there are certain metaphysical theories which leave room for the paranormal and certain others which don't, right? Certainly, I think this is the case. And I'll get back to metaphysics in a moment because it's it's one of those terms that we have to be careful how we use in a class like this. Make sure we're using it properly. So maybe whatever the paranormal or the anomalous is, it's just um, something that's maybe real but that we don't understand yet, and that's what the psychical researchers thought. That's what the parapsychologists thought. Maybe there is extrasensory perception. We just don't understand how it works yet. Okay, maybe. But another idea is that scientists, for whatever reason, are actually ignoring or actively suppressing the study of certain paranormal phenomena. So I see this a lot more in certain areas of the paranormal, certain areas under that paranormal umbrella, two of which are cryptozoology and ufology. So, cryptozoology is the study of mysterious creatures, not creatures that turn out to be real. Cryptozoology is almost exclusively about finding creatures from myth or folklore. And that's an important distinction. So, um, cryptozoologists aren't out there looking for like coelacanths or the dodo, right? Or creatures that we thought were extinct. That company that claimed to have created the dire wolves, remember that news from a little while ago? There was a biotechnology company that claimed we've made dire wolves, we've brought them back. Really, what they did was take gray wolves and make them look a bit more dire. Um, they're arguably not dire wolves, but they don't have cryptozoologists, working there coming up with ways to make dire wolves, right? That's not what it's about. It's not about that. It's about identifying creatures from myth or folklore. And ufology, the study of UFOs. I see a lot of conspiracist sort of thinking there, where researchers, both amateur and professional, claim that mainstream scientists are suppressing the truth. This is another thing, again, this is typical of conspiracy theories. And that's where you want to be careful. You don't want to start getting into conspiracy theories because conspiracy theories are like backwards science, right? We all learn the scientific method in school. What is the scientific method? Well, the scientific method that you learn in school is really almost like the 5 paragraph essay that you learn in school. It's a bare bones sort of teaching tool, but all good science begins with observation, with hypothesis generation. Then you test that hypothesis and you form a conclusion, right? Conspiracy theories do that backwards. They start with a conclusion. They don't test hypotheses properly, right? They don't aim to formulate falsifiable hypotheses, for example. They ignore counter evidence. They're not super aware of the cognitive biases that can affect their reasoning, right? And I don't want all of this to sound, harsh, like I'm ripping on people. Like I just don't want people to be conspiracy theorists because it's not a good means of knowledge generation. Can you think of any other examples from either, collections of conspiracy theories or from subfields that might fall under that paranormal umbrella? This idea, right, that the truth is being suppressed. Oops, I went too far. Yes. Well, yeah, Nina, that's a variation on this. But then again, think of anti-vaxxers. Um, it's not just companies, it's scientists. Um, and it's the people who know the truth, like the vaccines are going to give us all autism or something. And what you need to do is go outside and walk around barefoot in the sunshine, take your vitamins, eat your vegetables, use your crystals, etc. Those are not the scientists. Those are the wellness people, right? Um, but you're right. You do see it. You do see it the other way around, where it's the government. There are brave scientists who want to speak out against the government, um, and they're being suppressed. Of course, most of the time, these people are not actually scientists by training. So, but you're right. The moon landing being faked is another good one. Yeah, that's a really good one. The idea that NASA is hiding the truth. And before I put this lecture together, I was actually kind of going down a flat Earth rabbit hole, which I do from time to time on YouTube. But yeah, the idea is the Earth is actually flat, not a spheroidal shape. And if the truth got out, people wouldn't be able to handle it. I don't know why. Uh, the Earth is round or it's not. What's the big deal either way? I mean, it is round. It is a sphere. Um, but if it weren't, I don't understand why that knowledge would need to be hidden. The moon landing, of course, yeah, again, those NASA scientists, um, if the truth got out that we didn't go to the moon, again, pick your reason, right? Maybe we had to fake the moon landing so that we could convince the Russians that we won the Cold War or the space race, and that would help us win the Cold War. I don't know, but we did go to the moon numerous times, in fact. And the lizard men thing, yeah. All conspiracy theories seem to go back to either lizards, aliens, or the Jews, right? It's really wild, but there's always some secret cabal in control of everything, and it's usually, it could be lizard people, it could be the Jews, it could be aliens or interdimensional beings. It's always somebody um who's secretly controlling everything, right? That's another reason why you want to avoid conspiracy theories is because you don't want to go down that like anti-Semitism funnel. Um, the flat earthers, yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say I wish they did cause autism, but I would say, um, I mean, maybe this is something we can do for special topics, actually, the whole story behind why this belief is so widespread now is actually a pretty interesting one, right? Um, why would they fake the moon landing? Yeah, again, no idea. Oh yes. Oh yeah, Sonati, Area 51 you're thinking of. Yeah. Oh, Fern got it. Yeah. Oh yeah, Prince Charles being a vampire. That's because of that painting. Yeah, but okay, so yeah, Area 51. Yeah, well, Area 51 is interesting because I mean, Area 51 is a real place. It's where the United States Air Force develops all their weird experimental aircraft, right? So the yeah, Charles Manson, yeah. Um yeah, so like the SR-71 Blackbird, the really cool plane that the X-Men use, right? Like that's a real airplane. It was a real spy plane. It was developed at Area 51, right? But then the weird connection seems to be the Roswell incident where there was a UFO which turned out to be a weather balloon. The idea was that no, what the weather balloon story was a lie. It was actually aliens and the spacecraft, and they took those over to Nevada to Area 51, and that's where they keep them. They use this trope in Independence Day, right? That movie, Independence Day. Um, yeah. So, Holly's what's saying here? So for anomalous, Holly says for anomalous experiences that occur for individuals, given that they are very unusual, rare, unbidden, etc., it would be extremely hard to nail down variables that created the conditions which produced the effect. What mental, biological, social, environmental variables were part of the experience would need to be introduced, controlled for, and the experience, if reoccurred, somehow measured. Then repeated. Very tough. Yes, you're absolutely right. So there are limits to what we can do here, but there are also interesting regularities that make these phenomena kind of not as difficult to study as you would think. So I actually had a student write a paper on this, is the third man phenomena. So this is an experience that mountain climbers often have, where maybe they're climbing, they're up there, maybe they get separated, oxygen's running low, food's running low, water's running low, it's freezing cold, but they have this experience where there's another mysterious climber helping them, right? Um, That can be explained in a using a number of different phenomena that we, or psychological processes that we already understand fairly well, like hallucinations, psychosis, things like that. It's a little bit trickier with other stuff, but But you're right, Holly, that it can be really tricky to study this stuff. Okay, right, there I am, back on the proper slide. Now, yeah, to really know it. And again, that's also skepticism, right? That's scientific skepticism. We might have a reasonably coherent theory, or better, a hypothesis that could explain some anomalous phenomena, but that will not meet the standard of knowledge if we can't actually try and falsify it and fail to falsify it. Um, so, in any case, a lot of the different areas of study related to the paranormal are nowadays regarded as pseudoscience. So, something that might look scientific, but which is not scientific. So, they might use scientific sounding terminology, but they might not be doing hypothesis testing. They might be ignoring counter evidence. They might be violating principles like the principle of parsimony, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So, yeah, all of this is to say, when I characterize parapsychology as a pseudoscience, that's largely because it hasn't really worked. And it hasn't worked because it hasn't stuck to the tried and tested methods of knowledge generation that we see in proper science. Um, but on to philosophy. I said a little while ago that you'll encounter this word metaphysics. And philosophers mean something very specific um, when they talk about metaphysics. Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy. Basically, you could characterize it as the study of reality. It comes from meta, so after, beyond, and physica, like natural, physical. And it goes back to Aristotle, right? Aristotle had a book on physics, Ta Bibliota Physica or Physica, right? And then after that, he had written the metaphysics or Ta Bibliota Meta Ta Physica, the books that come after the physics. And in the metaphysics, he deals with more abstract stuff. So in the physics, he's dealing with like, more concrete natural phenomena. In metaphysics, he's dealing with stuff that's a little bit more abstract. Metaphysics, like if a physicist studies matter and energy, and a chemist studies chemicals, and a biologist studies life, what does a metaphysician do? Well, a metaphysician might inquire about things like, that are more abstract, like, do we have freedom of the will? That's a metaphysical question. When we ask questions about the nature of the mind, right? What is the mind? And I don't mean like psychology, like, okay, let's see how many numbers people can remember, or neuroscience. How do our neurons work? How do they exchange signals with one another, right? How does that work? Not those kinds of questions, but questions like what is a mind, right? What is thought? Those would be metaphysical questions. Um, Good and evil, right? These are metaphysical issues, right? Or they can be. Um, uh, it's not in terms of, well, the term, no, because Aristotle comes after Socrates. But philosophers were engaged in questions that we would now call metaphysical. So the term doesn't go quite that far back, but those kinds of questions, exploring those kinds of questions, that does go that far back. Although a lot of the pre-Socratic philosophers, at least if you're talking pre-Socratics in ancient Greece, they were a lot more like scientists. They were interested in studying the natural world, physis, nature, right? But of course, in other traditions, um, the ancient Indian tradition, for example, right? There are people doing what we would call metaphysics today. Now, paranormal researchers and people in New Age circles don't use this term that way. They seem to imply something, you know, beyond the physical, yes, but in a spirit, an almost exclusively spiritualist sense. So in paranormal and new age circles, metaphysics is, stuff like what we're talking about here, right? Precognition, the soul, right? It's not that that's not metaphysical in the philosophical sense. Do we have souls? That's a metaphysical question. Um, but what the paranormal people do with this term, it's a little bit, playing fast and loose, right? So, philosophers and paranormal folks are going to use the same term. They do not always mean the same thing, and that's something that I think it's important to be aware of. On the philosophical side of things, let's talk more about metaphysics. We have various metaphysical theories in philosophy, one of which is metaphysical naturalism. Well, exactly, right, Holly? That's a metaphysical question, right? How can the mind be physical but also intangible? Right, like if you've ever studied consciousness, you start running into these questions, right? Like I can describe coffee physically. I always use coffee in my examples because I'm always drinking it. But I could describe the molecular makeup of coffee, its temperature, the interaction with those molecules from the coffee with my taste buds, and how nerve signals travel to my brain and how neurons fire and all of that. That's a great physical description. But why does coffee taste like coffee? Why not? Why doesn't it taste like something else? Why do some people like it and some people dislike it? Right? These are the hard questions, right? Like David Chalmers, philosopher of mind, distinguishes between the easy problems in philosophy of mind, right? Like the questions that we can answer with psychology, neuroscience, so on. Those are the easy problems. The hard problem is explaining subjective consciousness, qualia, that sort of ineffable what it's likeness to experience. That's the hard problem. And we don't have a satisfactory answer yet. But getting back to metaphysical naturalism, sometimes we call this ontological naturalism. This is a metaphysical view that it makes claims about what exists and what does not exist. And what metaphysical naturalism says is that the only things that exist are those things that are a part of nature. Usually, I see this discussed in a way where it's more or less interchangeable with physicalism, which I'll say more about in a moment. But if you're a naturalist, chances are you're a physicalist. So, matter and energy, the associated properties of matter and energy, those are what exist. Supernatural things do not exist. So there are no gods or souls, no supernatural phenomena, no paranormal phenomena, nothing like that. Now, that's a pretty strong position, metaphysical naturalism. I think most people, well, I don't know if I can really claim this. Most people, I don't know most people, but a lot of naturalists are happy to be methodological naturalists only, not metaphysical naturalists. We could treat this as a sub branch of metaphysical naturalism, although I don't think that commitment to methodological naturalism necessarily implies a commitment to metaphysical naturalism. But this makes claims about what we can actually study, what we can actually understand. We can understand the natural universe um, with science, for example. Maybe there are paranormal or supernatural phenomena, but we can't understand those with science. So there are lots of methodological naturalists. These might be scientists who, for example, study, I don't know, biology. There are a lot of biologists, um, like Francis Collins. Um, Francis Collins was, I believe, the lead scientist on the Human Genome Project. So, helping to decode the genome of the human species. He led that effort. Um, Straight up methodological naturalist, but he's also, if I'm not mistaken, a born again Christian, which entails commitments to other more supernatural beliefs, right? That there exists a God, and all of the other claims associated with that flavor of Christianity, right? So that's methodological naturalism. Um, Science is what studies the natural world. And there may be other things beyond that, but that's not what science does, right? And most naturalists agree that the physical world is causally closed. This is important. The causal closure of the physical. This means that every physical effect has a sufficient physical cause. If we were to posit non-physical causes for physical effects, we would be committing causal overdetermination. And this is what I mean. Let us say, um, let's say I'm on Wheel of Fortune, right? Everybody remember Wheel of Fortune? I don't know if it's still on. I used to watch it when I was a kid, though. And I remember, there's always people that when they spin the wheel, Pat spins the wheel and somebody's like, come on, big money, big money, big money, as if they can will the wheel to stop, where they will potentially win more money, right? Yeah, the word game, that's right. Where you have to solve puzzles. And you can buy your vowels. Consonants are free, but you got to buy a vowel. So you're trying to solve these word puzzles. You're spinning the wheel, and you're like, "Come on, big money, big money, big money!" Right? This is actually a really interesting phenomenon, right? People that are less good at certain kinds of reasoning, right? People that are more susceptible to apophenia, pareidolia, people that are not very good at reasoning about probabilities, which actually turns out is most people, um, may believe they can influence the outcome of certain events. Um, like on Wheel of Fortune. You're trying to get that money, right? You want that wheel to stop. It's the same with people who try and influence the outcome of dice throws if they're playing craps, right? Like in a casino, or if you believe that if you just cheer really hard for your favorite team, they'll score a goal, right? It's a very widespread phenomenon. Ryan Seacrest. Oh, weird. That's weird. I don't know. That would be weird. I don't know if I could watch it now. Just not because Ryan Seacrest, just because it's different. I don't like it. It's kind of like how I can't really watch Jeopardy anymore. Since Alex Trebek died, it's just not the same. Sometimes I'll watch it, but I don't watch it like I did before. Um, yeah, it's just weird. It's like the uncanny valley for game shows, right? So, what's happening there? Yeah, that's right. Everybody pour one out for Alex Trebek, who incidentally went to high school in Sudbury. I went to high school outside of Sudbury. I didn't go to the same high school as Alex Trebek, but within the same city generally. And he's an alumni of the University of Ottawa. So there's some Trebek trivia for all of you. No, no, Fern. No, much older than me. Yeah, geez, Alex Trebek was hosting Jeopardy when I was still knee high to a grasshopper, as my parents might say. Um, what's going on here, right? You're, oh, come on, big money, big money. I'm going to make that wheel stop on the money and I'm going to win. I'm going to solve the puzzle, buy a vowel, whatever, get the vacation to Mexico, or the car, whatever it is. Now, so those people that believe that works, believes that it's their mental effect, a mental effect that affects the behavior of the wheel. But the behavior of the wheel, where it stops, is a physical effect. In order to explain where it stops, all you need is a sufficient physical cause. So the force with which you spin the wheel, right? The physics of the wheel, like the mechanisms, the thing it's sitting on. Maybe there's some gears and some bearings, and there's that little clicky thing on it, that clicks, and because there's those little posts, click, 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 until it suddenly comes to a stop. All of the physical characteristics about the setup of the wheel and the force with which it's initially turned, um, that's what determines where the wheel stops. So that physical effect, where the wheel stops, has a sufficient physical cause. By then positing that there's this additional cause, like my willing the wheel to stop, that would be a case of causal determination, causal overdetermination, because now we've got two causes for one effect, and we don't need two causes for one effect unless there are actually two causes for one effect. But where we don't need two causes for one effect, that's causal overdetermination. And that's all got to do with this idea called the causal closure of the physical. And that's very important. Keep this in mind as we look at some of the paranormal phenomena that we will examine later in the class. Getting more metaphysical, another distinction that I think will be important to keep in mind is the distinction between substance dualism and substance monism. Again, these are different kinds of metaphysical theories. There are theories about the kinds of things that exist and what those things are like. Now, I mentioned physicalism earlier. Physicalism is a type of substance monism. It's not the only type, right? There's also like the subjective idealism of George Berkeley. But physicalism, as I said earlier, is the idea that it's just physical stuff that exists. It emerges out of the materialist tradition. So materialism goes all the way back to Democritus, who was actually a contemporary of Socrates. Democritus is the guy who originally came up with the with the idea of atoms, right? Democritus thought that he was a materialist because he thought everything was atoms and void. Nowadays, how we understand atoms is a lot different than how Democritus understood them. Like Democritus understood them as like little individual, indivisible bits of matter that could not be split. Of course, the things we call atoms now can be split. That's nuclear fission. So that's how a nuclear power plant operates, right? Um, but this carried on and was sort of reinvigorated in the early modern period by thinkers like this guy, Rene Descartes, and also by Thomas Hobbes. Um, and the idea was that everything was just matter in motion. And if we can understand the laws that govern the motions of the matter, the laws of nature, then we can understand everything. Physicalism is a little bit different. Physicalism doesn't just look at matter. Physicalism includes non-material yet physical things. So physicalism, like materialism can't really explain things like electricity or magnetism or gravity, right? But physicalism can, because physicalism is not just matter in motion, it's also like physical forces, right? So that's physicalism, a kind of substance monism where only the physical exists. Yeah. Yeah, Fern, that's an interesting point. You can, if you're superstitious, that would be like taking apart the wheel on Wheel of Fortune and learning how it works, right? If you wanted to look at the source code for a game you play, right? Or I remember when I was in high school, there was this website I would go to that claimed to um, train your psychic powers, right? And you'd play little games like little card guessing games. The problem was that on web browsers back in the day, there was a little thing on the bottom that actually told you where the link you were about to click on was going to take you. So you didn't have to be psychic to always get the right card. because just by hovering over the cards, a little thing would pop up down here like, okay, this goes to correct. And yeah. So bad web design. Um, so that's physicalism. Um, substance monism, uh, physicalism. Not the only kind of monism, but the kind that will concern us more so in this class. Yeah, I don't know that game, but um, this was not really a game. Again, it was kind of like a just a hack website. Um, we can compare substance monism with substance dualism. And again, this is in our, contemporary tradition, all due to Rene Descartes. Rene Descartes believed that there was not one fundamental kind of substance, but two. And he called those in Latin res cogitans and res extensa. Res cogitans is thinking substance, so there are minds or souls, and extended substance, matter. Um, Descartes is certainly not the first dualist. Plato is arguably a dualist. Um, so if you read some of Plato's dialogues, such as, well, two that I cover in another class that I teach, are the Meno and the Phaedo. And the Meno kind of deals a little bit with Plato's epistemology, and the Phaedo deals with the soul. And in both of those, you can see that Plato, through the character Socrates, is espousing a kind of dualism, right? Where the mind is a soul or a spirit, a sort of divine, incorporeal, incorruptible substance, and everything else is corruptible, material, made of matter, that kind of thing. There are dualists nowadays, but most of them tend to be property dualists. So that's property dualism. You could be a physicalist, right? You could be a substance monist, say you're a physicalist, but you could still be a property dualist. And you might say, okay, there are physical properties, but there are also mental properties. So, for example, if we want to understand the mind, right? Um, Maybe I have a belief. I believe it is sunny outside. And it just so happens to be sunny right now, right? So, how can I understand that? Well, we could talk about the areas of my brain and how they represent that state of affairs in the world. What neurons are firing and how are they firing, et cetera, right? Um, that's the physical properties. And then there are the mental properties, right? Okay, I have this belief. So because I have the belief that it is sunny, if I leave the house, I'm not going to bring my umbrella with me, right? So my mental state apparently has this sort of, causal power, where it can affect my behavior. According to some thinkers, that is also causal overdetermination, right? Like think of Jaegwon Kim. If you take my philosophy of mind course later this summer, we'll be talking about this exact thing when we talk about something called epiphenomenalism. But you don't need to worry about that in this class. But yeah, most dualists nowadays are not substance dualists. They're property dualists. So where there is one kind of substance, the physical, but it has physical properties and mental properties, rather than exclusively physical properties. Okay, any questions so far? We're already about an hour in. We're doing pretty good. Well, these are not, yeah, Holly, yeah, this is for Holly. Um, this is not an exclusively Cartesian thing. But Descartes was somewhat of a materialist, and on materialism, everything is matter in motion. And if we can understand the rules, the laws of nature that govern the way the matter moves, then we can understand the physical world, the natural world. Again, this goes back to Democritus. Thomas Hobbes, also a materialist, a contemporary of Descartes, along with other scientists, like who we would now call scientists. Back in the day, we called them all natural philosophers. The word science is actually relatively new. So Descartes, Hobbes, Galileo, Isaac Newton, Pierre de Laplace, right? These are all materialists. And some of them stop there, right? Like Laplace was an atheist, but Descartes wasn't. Descartes said, yeah, there's material stuff, there's res extensa and that, but there's also thinking substance. Um, and really, there's if you read Descartes, you see that there's also infinite substance. Infinite substance is God, right? So these are just some sort of metaphysical ideas it will be good to keep in mind as we proceed. What about the supernatural? You're welcome. You're welcome, Holly. What about the supernatural? Like I've mentioned the supernatural. What has the supernatural to do with the paranormal? Well, I think sometimes there's some overlap and sometimes there's not, right? They might refer to the same thing, but they might not. Some things that are paranormal, you might also think of as supernatural, like ghosts. Ghosts are certainly, if you said to somebody, name five paranormal things, ghosts would probably appear on that list. But ghosts would also be supernatural. Um, Contrast that with something like miracles, right? In various religions, but especially the Abrahamic ones, right? There are claims of miracles, right? Uh, what's an example? Should be pretty easy, right? Yeah, water into wine, classic. And the loaves and the fishes, right? From the New Testament, Jesus, we got no wine, no problem. Boom, wine. Jesus turns it into wine. What else does he do? There's not enough bread and fish. Well, he multiplies it. He's healing the lepers and the blind, right? All miracles. I don't know that we call that paranormal though, right? Although if it weren't Jesus doing it, maybe we would, right? Yeah, the resurrection of Lazarus, Jesus' own resurrection. Yeah, Moses parting the sea. Yeah, like we call these miracles because they occur in, like religious narratives. But if there was just some guy who showed up and claimed to be able to heal the sick and walk on water, like some kind of guru, um, maybe then we'd consider it paranormal, right? Like think of, for example, the psychic surgeons. The psychic surgeons, I think it's important to state at the outset, are frauds. Um, but what psychic surgeons claim to be able to do is remove disease from your body, without actually performing surgery. And they use sleight of hand to do this. So you go to a psychic surgeon and they feel around and they go, "Yes, I can feel there's a tumor here." And they get in there and they're like, put their hands on you and they appear to pull out some kind of gross thing. Usually it's chicken parts, chicken organs. And they've just kind of sleight of handed them out of there, right? But those people claim to be using divine powers for healing. You could call that supernatural or paranormal. But when it's Jesus doing it, it's just a miracle, right? So whether this occurs in the context of a religion or something else maybe has some effect on how we think of it, whether it's supernatural, paranormal, both, or neither, right? Yeah, Danica, that's also a good observation, right? If God is doing it, or if, some prophet or representative or incarnation or whatever of God is doing it, then it's a miracle. But if it's due to the devil or a malevolent force, that's bad, right? Then it's maybe paranormal. Then it's occult, right? It's an occult phenomenon. Um, so I'm trying to think of an example, but like, so there are religious communities that believe in things like the power of prayer and miracles, but they also believe in black magic. And it's not like a distinction that a lot of us would draw, like a religious, somebody who's religious living in the 21st century in North America might say like something like, "Oh yeah, miracles, yeah, those are legit." But black magic, witchcraft, whatever, that's nonsense. Then again, a lot of other people would say, no, no, the black magic, the witchcraft, that is real and we need to be careful of it, right? Like all those people that are afraid of Harry Potter, right? Um, or in the 80s, I mentioned the Satanic Panic, how we did a special topics lecture last summer on the Satanic Panic. In the 1980s, there were a lot of religious people who were very worried about Dungeons and Dragons and heavy metal, right? Which sounds kind of silly to us, uh, namely because it is. But yeah, they were legitimately afraid that these were satanic activities and that Satan actually has power, right? Oh, voodoo. Yeah, Jamal. Yeah, good example. Or what did you say before? In the same way that non-Abrahamic traditions were demonized. Yeah, yeah. Voodoo would be a good example. So I'm not a super knowledgeable of voodoo, but I know that it comes to North America via Haiti, via Africa. And it's also where a lot of our notions, like, the notions of the zombie come from, right? So the zombie is just the sort of the Haitian version of the undead. And it's kind of been appropriated, um, uh, and used as a vehicle of horror, right? Of course, nowadays zombies are so different from Haitian zombies that, maybe the worries I actually don't know what I think about this, whether the worries of appropriation have kind of dissolved, but I do think you have to be kind of careful with that concern, right? Um, but nowadays zombies are not magic, right? Like like a Haitian zombie raising the dead in the voodoo tradition, that's magic, right? But the zombies from I don't know, like The Last of Us. Are they even really zombies? Not really. I mean, they're the infected, right? And they've got fungus up in their brains and whatnot. See, we've gone from a supernatural to a naturalistic take on zombies. Very interesting. Um, oh, interesting. Tell us more, Danica. So not all zombies are dead. What? So are some like alive but enslaved somehow? Like their will, like someone else controls them? Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, that reminds me of well, a European parallel with that would be the Golem of Prague, right? In Jewish folklore, there's the Golem of Prague. So like in Europe in the Dark Ages, right, the Jews are persecuted. And so this rabbi makes a golem. Oh, okay. Their souls are taken. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a bit like the golem. Um, Rabbi makes a golem, a man out of clay, and he writes in Hebrew truth, and it becomes alive. And it's supposed to protect the people that live in the ghettos of Prague, in what is now the Czech Republic. But it goes out of control. And so the rabbi has to remove one character, which changes the meaning of the word from truth to death. And then the golem deactivates, right? Oh, interesting. That's really cool. So if I run into a zombie, the zombie, uh, I guess I don't know what we would call them, the shaman, priest or priestess who has the zombie will be there too. Like the zombie is a proxy. That's interesting. Um, so yeah, the supernatural, the paranormal, I guess what I'm trying to say here is, to a certain extent, these are a bit like cluster concepts, right? Um, there's no neat and tidy list of necessary and sufficient conditions that tell us in a straightforward way what is supernatural and what is paranormal. There does seem to be a lot of overlap. But again, as with metaphysics, the term metaphysics, you're going to see these words employed in different ways by different people. So just take care to try and really read everything closely. Um, what would a metaphysical naturalist say? A metaphysical naturalist might deny that the supernatural and the paranormal exist. They might also say that, well, while there are weird things that might seem supernatural, really they're not supernatural, and we can understand them with the tools of science. Real quick from Fern, is there a difference between supernatural and supranatural? Ah, I will have to get back to you on that. Supranatural is not really a term that I see being used very often. But I can try and answer that later. I can look into that for you. Right. So a metaphysical naturalist might deny that there are paranormal or supernatural phenomena out there, or that if there are phenomena that are ostensibly supernatural or paranormal, they have a naturalistic explanation. So, for example, lightning. What is lightning? Got any well, do we even offer meteorology classes at Carleton? I don't know. We must. Static electricity, burning plasma. Yeah, those are good answers. I think you're both right. Um, Static electricity, the sort of static charge, because of what's happening in the atmosphere and on the Earth, we get a static charge building up in some clouds. Yeah, Kaya, yeah, electrons going through the air. Yeah, those are all correct, right? You get like a buildup of I don't know, maybe like negative ions up in the clouds, and it's got to go somewhere, so it goes down and it hits something high on the land, like a tree or a building. Hopefully not a person, although people do get struck by lightning because the electricity wants to go down, right? That's how we understand it now. Yeah, of course, it's static electricity. When we see the arc of lightning, that is a plasma. So that's a certain state of matter where the gases in the atmosphere become ionized because of the electric charge. And the electric charge we can understand in terms of electrons. Electrons are negatively charged subatomic particles. So you've all got part of the answer. Why lightning? We surely we wouldn't think lightning is supernatural, would we? Or would we? Was there a time when humans did think of lightning as supernatural? And if so, give me some examples. Yeah, that's right. Leo and Kaya. If there's lightning, Zeus is throwing his thunderbolt. Or it could also be the sparks from Hephaestus making some thunderbolts for Zeus, right? Oh yeah, Thor. Ollie says, yeah, Thor. Interesting. Here's an interesting bit of trivia for you. Uh, and I'm not an expert in this area, but I do have a sort of passion, a sort of interest in Germanic mythology. But nowhere in our sources that we presently have, like from the Viking or from post-Viking age Europe, like the Prose Edda, the Poetic Edda, all of the sagas, nowhere in there is Thor actually associated with lightning. Where does that association come from? It's probably earlier. There was probably a time when Thor was associated with lightning. Thor is definitely associated with thunder. His name, Thor, comes from a Proto-Indo-European root, which I think is Thunraz, which does mean thunder. And his counterparts throughout that area of the world. In Germany, it's Donner. In Old English, it was Donor. Um, all of these mean thunder. Um, but the association between Thor and lightning is something that's actually recorded by the Romans. It's not actually in any of the texts that we have from the Norse. Although, just as his name, Thor, means thunder, the name of his hammer, Mjolnir, might mean lightning. So that's something that I find really interesting. How, there's this association that was kind of lost in some traditions and preserved in others. And yeah, lightning is divine, whether you're looking at Zeus, Jupiter, Thor. In ancient India, Indra has a thunderbolt. So Indra is like a war god. He rides this big elephant. He has a big giant palace, and he has a thunderbolt too. So he comes down from his palace on top of a mountain wielding a thunderbolt, right? And there are lots of other examples I'm sure you could find. So a metaphysical naturalist would say, lightning? No, that's not Zeus. Maybe I don't know what it is, but it's not Zeus, right? A methodological naturalist would say that there could be supernatural phenomena or maybe not. But that's not what science does. So again, like guys like Francis Collins, right? Leader of the Human Genome Project. Um, Methodological naturalist at work, evangelical Christian at home. Um, So he believes when it comes to studying the human genome, you got to use science. When it comes to, I don't know, understanding life, like your life, uh, he uses his religion for that. So I would call him a methodological naturalist. He's not a naturalist outside of work. He's a theist. But when he's at work, he's a naturalist, right? What do you think dualists might say? Maybe it depends on the kind of dualist you are. If you're a substance dualist, um, there doesn't seem to be anything radical about suggesting that things like ghosts exist if you're a substance dualist. I can hear somebody outside there. I'm sorry, I'm just distracted. Right? Because if the physical is one kind of substance and the mental is another kind of substance, then maybe the mental substance can survive the death of the body. And maybe if it has unfinished business, it hangs around, right? So a substance dualist might be kind of amenable to certain paranormal phenomena, like ghosts. A property dualist might not be, right? And as we'll see in a moment, the early psychical researchers actually did think that these phenomena that we could call supernatural or paranormal, that they just weren't explained yet. They were real things, but we had yet to explain them. All right, what slide are we on? Oh, only on slide 10. I'm going to have to pick up the pace here. Um, how's everybody doing? Do we want to have a quick break? Oh, actually, Bell, that's an interesting point. Yeah. Maybe because of because of the different travel time between light and sound. Maybe they associated Thor with thunder and not lightning. Yeah, I could be. Well, we're gonna go till 5:25 and it's almost 4. So we could take a little 10-15 minute break now, and then we'd have A little over an hour left. All right, I'm just going to call it. I say we take a little 10-minute break. So we'll come back at 5 minutes after 4, and we'll try and power through everything else. Okay, I'll see you all in 10 minutes. And of course, I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording, so that when I upload this, we don't have a big giant pause of nothingness in the middle of the lecture. So I'll see you all in 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, let's keep at it. Share my screen again. Okay, so I think a really interesting thing to talk about next is how the word paranormal actually got into the English language. Um, because we can, sorry, that's my dog barking. Um, one moment. Come here. Class, Tuba. Here, obligatory dog introduction. This is Tula, and she's very loud. So that's why you're in air jail right now. Hmm? Yes. Okay, you can go back down on the floor now. You go. No. Oh, good. Good. Oh, some of you can't. Some of you can. Weird. Yeah. That'll probably happen from time to time. No big deal. So, yeah, how did the word paranormal even get into the English language? By looking at this, we can actually understand a little bit more about the history um, of paranormal research, of psychical research, and about how our understanding of the word has changed. So, for this, we're looking at Penman's short article where he uh, kind of goes over the history of its introduction into English. Uh, this all started when his students noticed something weird in the Oxford English Dictionary. They noticed that um, the Oxford English Dictionary actually listed the first instance of the word paranormal in English in another dictionary in the 1920 revision of Webster's New International Dictionary of the English Language, which defined paranormal as, quote, phenomena analogous to physical phenomena but with no known physical cause, like mediumistic raps, telekinesis, etc. Now, here's why that's weird. Dictionaries are not, contrary to what a lot of people kind of maybe think of them as, they're not actually how we come to define words. They're not, it's not like we release a dictionary and says, this is how you use this word. Although we do use dictionaries like that. What dictionaries actually do, especially dictionaries like the Oxford English Dictionary, is record how words are used. So the fact that this first appearance of paranormal was in another dictionary means that that cannot be um, the first use of the word. It would have had to have already been out there to be recorded in a dictionary. So it must have been being used prior to 1920. And it was. And Penman kind of goes over the history of that. Um, yeah. Penman writes on the way the use of the word has changed. He writes this. He says, post X-Files, the television show that was on in the 90s and maybe the early 2000s, the term paranormal is ubiquitous. In popular culture and some reference works, it is often used to designate all manner of supernatural phenomena, from psychic activity to spirit contact, sometimes branching out to incorporate subjects as diverse as extraterrestrial life, ghosts, cryptozoology, and the Bermuda Triangle. This was, however, not always the case. And in fact, prior to the 1920s, paranormal was largely restricted to the sorts of phenomena, referred to the sorts of phenomena that would be studied a little while later by parapsychologists. So we're talking psi phenomena, right? Telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, psychokinesis, etc. And this usage goes back to the 19th century um, during the spiritualist craze. And I'll talk more about the origins of this when we look at ESP and when we look at mediumship. But the spiritualist craze actually began in America in the 19th century, and it was thanks to the Fox sisters who lived in New York. Um, they communicated or claimed to communicate with the spirit of a deceased person who was buried under their house by listening for these raps. Not like raps like, funky fresh rhymes, but raps like a knocking sound. Um, so what turned out to be going on was that they were cracking their toe knuckle joints against their bedposts, and they created a sort of system, one tap for yes, two for no, and claimed to be communicating with the spirit this way. What they were actually doing was fraudulent. But this kicked off a sort of craze where people claiming to be spirit mediums would hold seances, and investigators, some skeptical, like Michael Faraday, the British scientist, and some less so, like the founders of the Society for Psychical Research, would come and investigate. So these were psychical phenomena or spiritual phenomena. They characterized the spiritualist movement. And in 1882, in the United Kingdom, the SPR, or Society for Psychical Research, was established. It was established by a philosopher named Henry Sidgwick, a classicist named Frederick William Henry Myers, and a psychologist named Edmund Gurney. Um, its membership was international, and the membership and its founders were dedicated to understanding the, quote, mesmeric, psychical, and spiritualistic. Mesmeric, what does that mean? Comes from a thinker named Mesmer. He's the animal magnetism guy. You might have heard of this term, animal magnetism. This sort of vitalistic force that he thought existed um, within all living beings. That's where it comes from. His name is also the root of the word mesmerism, mesmerize, right? Like to be hypnotized, because he was also an early experimenter with hypnosis. Um, they coined the term supernormal to refer to these sorts of things, to try and develop this nomenclature, for their study of these phenomena. And supernormal referred to things that were out of the ordinary, currently beyond uh, scientific explanation, but that could, in principle, be explained scientifically, right? Um, Myers here writes, I have ventured to coin the word supernormal to be applied to phenomena which are beyond what usually happens, beyond, that is, in the sense of suggesting unknown psychical laws. It is thus formed on an analogy of abnormal. When we speak of an abnormal phenomenon, we do not mean one which contravenes natural laws, but one which exhibits them in an unusual or inexplicable form. Similarly, by a supernormal phenomenon, I mean not one which overrides natural laws, for I believe no such phenomenon to exist, but one which exhibits the action of laws higher, in a psychical aspect, than are discerned in action in everyday life. By higher, either in a psychical or in a physiological sense, I mean apparently belonging to a more advanced stage of evolution. And that is why I have put here the uncanny X-Men. Early psychical researchers thought of these supernormal phenomena as kind of the same thing that we see, and I'm not trying to be facetious here, but the sort of same thing that we see in the X-Men, right? The X-Men, if you're not familiar from Marvel Comics, are mutants, right? So who do we have here? We've got Storm, right? She can control the weather. I think that's Colossus. It's got Metal. Cyclops with his laser eyes. We got Wolverine, obviously, who has a healing factor, and adamantium bones, right? And there's lots of other ones, right? But they all are mutants. They all have some sort of genetic difference that means they have some kind of special power. And this might actually represent a future direction for human evolution. So the subjects that these people were studying were not unlike how we think of the X-Men from comic books, right? And supernormal served until the beginning of the 20th century when paranormal entered English via French. So there are French words like paranormal, paranormal. I'm very bad at French. Please don't make fun of my accent. And this term was borrowed into English from French and popularized in Joseph Maxwell's book, Metaphysical Phenomena. Maxwell was a physician and spiritualist researcher. And you can see here his book, Metaphysical Phenomena. He's talking about, sure, things that are beyond the physical, but not in the sense that philosophers tend to talk about it, right? When we talk about metaphysics like beyond the physical, we mean abstract things like free will, God, good and evil, the nature of the mental, right? Maxwell's talking about spiritualism specifically, right? And his definition of paranormal actually aligns nicely with supernormal, the way supernormal was used by the members of the Society for Psychical Research. So it concerned psychic phenomena, which again meant mental in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It just meant mental phenomena. So the idea here was that maybe there are poorly understood mental faculties that people can access, for things like ESP or telekinesis. And maybe those presently only exist in special cases, but might one day become the norm, right? So Maxwell wrote, properly speaking, there is no veritable automatism in phenomena of sensitivity, but we can nevertheless distinguish them first, normal sensitive, therein first normal sensitive phenomena, that is to say, phenomena produced under physiological conditions more or less well known but frequent, such as hallucinations, hypermnesia. And second, paranormal phenomena, that is to say, phenomena which imply the existence of modes of perception to which the normal personality is foreign. Clairvoyance, clairaudience, telesthesia, telepathy, and exteriorization of motor power. So, this is what is being said here is basically like there are what we would call today abnormal psychological states, abnormal phenomena like hallucinations that we more or less understand well enough. And then there are these paranormal ones, right? Which are foreign to the normal personality. Special people that have these special powers. In a review of this book, J. Lewis McIntyre writes, the sensitives, so that's Maxwell's terms for those possessing psychical abilities, are persons who are indeed paranormal, but who are not therefore to be described as degenerates, neurotics, or hysterics. Rather, they have powers which at present transcend those of other men, but which may at some future phase of evolution become themselves the rule rather than the exception. So again, a bit of that X-Men sort of vibe, right? Maybe these are just special people that represent a future step in human evolution. But they're not normal. They're not quite normal, but they're not degenerates, neurotics, or hysterics. Now, the terminology is a little antiquated, right? What is a degenerate? Well, this is around the same time that unfortunately there was also a lot of eugenics talk, right? Eugenics comes from the Greek for well-born. And the idea in the late 19th and 20th century was that we humans ought to artificially select ourselves to be the best humans we can be. And this culminated in um, a lot of bad stuff, right? Most noteworthy, the Holocaust during the Second World War. But that's not to single out the Nazis. Everyone had a eugenics program in Europe and North America. We had one here where we were sterilizing, the mentally ill, indigenous people, stuff like that. All right. So it's not good. And so a degenerate is a term for somebody who is not well born. Degenerate means like badly born or poorly born. Neurotics, somebody who's neurotic is very nervous, anxious, and hysterics, right? Again, not really a real thing. Hysteria was a diagnosis that was given to women. And it's not really a mental disorder, but it was kind of an umbrella term that we would use to just sort of categorize women who were suffering from any kind of mental disorder, or maybe indeed women who were just not conforming to the social roles that were expected of them, right? So we don't really use the terminology like this anymore, but what McIntyre is saying is that, okay, these people aren't insane. Um, they have these abilities, and maybe that represents a future direction of evolution for humanity. And this incorporates, again, elements of the earlier term supernormal, right? For reasons that I just said. Possible future direction of human evolution, and something which, in principle, we should be able to eventually explain scientifically. Now, the Society for Psychical Research had a journal that was members only and proceedings papers that were publicly available. And in both of those, we started to see terms like psychic phenomena, psychical research, paranormal, supernormal. All of these were used more or less interchangeably. It was even paranormal specifically was even sometimes used in scientific literature to describe something that was just unusual, not something that we would today consider paranormal. But this really began to change in the 30s, thanks to the Rhines, Joseph Banks Rhine and his wife and research partner Louisa Rhine. They published a book, or rather, a lot of material, not just a book, on extrasensory perception. They used paranormal rather than supernormal, and that helped to popularize the term and to kind of further associate it with psi phenomena, what we used to call psychical research, right? And now it refers to more than that, right? It is concerned with sure, the paranormal still refers to psi phenomena, but it also refers to a lot more, right? Cryptids, ghosts, haunted houses, psychics, alien life forms, all kinds of stuff. That's why in this class, once we get past the uncanny stuff, we look at ESP and mediumship and things like that. We start to include more stuff under the umbrella. So we'll be talking about aliens and UFOs. We'll be talking about astrology, and then we'll have the special topics lectures where who knows what we'll talk about. You'll have some choice in that, but we're going to keep it pretty broad in terms of how we use the word paranormal, right? But let's talk a little bit about parapsychology. So, the Journal of Parapsychology defines parapsychology as the branch of science that deals with psi communication, and that is behavioral or personal exchanges with the environment which are extrasensory motor, so not dependent on the senses and the muscles. And psi is a general term to identify a person's extrasensory motor communication with the environment. Psi includes extrasensory perception, which is experience of or response to a target, object, state, event, or a target person, object, state, event, or influence without sensory contact. So that's stuff like telepathy, sending your thoughts to someone else or receiving thoughts from someone else. Clairvoyance, knowledge of things that are, like seeing things far away from you. Precognition, knowing about events before they happen, and also psychokinesis, what we used to call telekinesis. That's the extramotor aspect of psi. So, a direct but non-muscular influence exerted by the subject on external physical processes. So, moving things with your mind. Um, right? That's psychokinesis. So, ESP and PK fall under that psi umbrella. Um, Now, the Rhines adopted parapsychology from the German equivalent, parapsychology. I'm not pronouncing that right, but um, I think it would be parapsychology, right? It would be a hard G in German, if I'm not mistaken. And parapsychology, paranormal, these replace the earlier terms, psychical research, supernormal. Now, the Rhines changed things up, to their credit. The psychical researchers would study anybody who claimed to have supernormal powers. So, spirit mediums, right? And a lot of them were taken in by these mediums who were by and large fraudulent. Um, the Rhines did not look at these special individuals. They looked at ordinary individuals. And they collected lots and lots of data from ordinary individuals and tried to look for patterns in that data. They also avoided anything to do with life after death. So, no mediums, but also no haunted houses, um, no seances, right? They weren't interested in that. They said, we're not going to touch that stuff. We're just going to look at the psi abilities of ordinary people. Yeah. Well, haunted houses are interesting. There are definitely reports of haunted locations going back into antiquity. Um, and maybe we can talk about this if we do a special topics lecture on haunted houses. Although I could also do this when we talk about the uncanny. But I think the reason why is probably due to animistic tendencies that people have. Animism is, when you look at inanimate things as if they were alive, right? So animism is a feature of, for example, a lot of indigenous religions, a lot of shamanistic religions, right? So if you think of, for example, the Shinto religion from Japan, on that religion, there are kami, spirits, gods, and everything has some kami associated with them, right? So a tree could have a kami, a hot spring could have a kami, right? Maybe a particularly important kami gets a shrine built in its honor, and people can go there and pray to it, right? If you really want to get, again, I'm being 100% serious here, but if you really want a really neat um, look into animism, at least in that sort of Shinto tradition, you should watch the animated films of Hayao Miyazaki, particularly Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro, which I think do a very good job of kind of showing this sort of imaginative, animistic outlook. And incidentally, these are Studio Ghibli films, right? Totoro, especially, is a children's movie, but children also have animistic tendencies, right? Children have no problem pretending that their toys are alive, right? Um, and I think these tendencies can also explain haunted houses for reasons that we can talk about next time. But yeah, no life after death. So they worked on trying to turn parapsychology into a proper experimental science at Duke University in the 20s and 30s. They did this by conducting experiments, as I said, with ordinary folks. And when they studied ESP, they would use Zener cards. You've probably seen these here or there if you've got something of an interest in the paranormal. Maybe you've watched a documentary on it or watched some YouTube videos or some TikToks or something. You might have seen these cards. They also have colored variations where the shapes have different colors. But there are five of each of these shapes, a square, a circle, a cross, a star, and wavy lines. So five of each of these, so a total of 25. And they could use these to test telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition. How? Well, because we know we have five different copies of five different symbols, we know that our odds of correctly identifying one symbol are 1 in 5. So let's say I want to do a telepathy experiment. So I have somebody shuffle the deck, and then maybe the sender picks a card, and maybe they get a circle, right? And so now the sender's job is to telepathically send me that symbol, and I'm the receiver, so I'm supposed to receive the circle, and we just keep doing that over and over and over and over again. And if your hit rate is greater than 1 in 5, something might be going on. But if your hit rate is around 1 in 5, that's probably just due to chance. And again, we can do this with telepathy. We can do it with clairvoyance, right? We can see if somebody can guess what card I've got in another room, or precognition, what card will be next, right? We shuffle the deck, put it there. What's on top? Oh, I think it's going to be this card, and then we can look and see, right? Now, in Joseph Banks Rhine's monograph, ESP, Extrasensory Perception, he collected data on over 90,000 guesses. And the average number of hits per run of 25 guesses was actually 7.1. So correct. That's higher than the chance expectation of 5 out of 25, or 1 in 5. So it did seem like this hit rate was not due to chance. And that actually got the scientific community to take an interest in this. Um, Nina says there's an ESP test scene in the first Ghostbusters movie where, oh, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. I actually am somewhat embarrassed to say that I've never seen it. But I know that Dan Aykroyd, who was also in the film and also, I guess, produced, wrote, I don't know what he had to do with it, a lot, I assume, but he's got a very big interest in the paranormal, which I think is interesting. Obviously, as evidenced by his involvement in the movie Ghostbusters, right? So, not surprising to see that there. Um, the problem was with Rhine's research was that other researchers were not really able to replicate his results. So replication is important, right? If I run a study like the Rhines did, and I get a hit rate that the accuracy is greater than chance would allow, that's good, right? I want that. Does that mean my results were still not due to chance? Not necessarily. In order to know for certain, we've got to replicate the study, and we have to see if we get the same result again, or a similar result at least. If we replicate these studies and all the replicated studies just have chance results, then probably the initial study was just an anomaly. So that's why replication is important in the sciences. There were also some criticisms made of his methodology, and these actually proved to be the most problematic. There are things like leakage, like sensory leakage. Um, maybe I'm holding up a Zener card, beaming it to you telepathically, but what you're actually doing is seeing the reflection of the symbol in my glasses, right? So we have to account for stuff like that. Little unconscious tells that the senders and receivers might have, right? Maybe what people are actually doing is using nonverbal communication somehow, even though they don't realize that's what they're doing, right? So we have to account for things like these, and the Rhines didn't really do that. That's not really a dig against them, because psychology, let alone parapsychology, psychology was not, in the 30s, it was not what it is today. Right. Nowadays, we know what to look out for. At this time, we really didn't, because the discipline was still not fully mature. But the Rhines did succeed at establishing the basic experimental procedures that parapsychologists would use from the 30s on to about the 70s. Things started to change a little bit in the 70s because of computers. So they would use Zener cards or ESP cards. When it came to looking at psychokinesis, they would use dice. So you roll a dice and you try and influence the outcome. So maybe I have a die and I want it to come up with six to land on six. So I shuffle, or I don't shuffle dice. I shake the dice and roll them, and come on, six, right? Just like with Wheel of Fortune, come on, big money. Try to make it land on a six. Maybe you've done this if you're playing some kind of dice game, right? Maybe you're playing some kind of tabletop RPG, and you really want that whatever number to come up to give you a hit or a bonus or a whatever it does. And you're trying to use your mind to influence the outcome. If that were a real thing, that would be a type of psychokinesis, and that's what the Rhines tried to tried to study. So, as we get into the 70s, it becomes very clear that a lot of this is difficult to replicate. And some cases of fraud were shown to have occurred, like in the work of S.G. Soule. Soule was a paranormal researcher, a parapsychologist who gathered lots and lots of data on these sorts of experiments, like card guessing experiments. And he claimed to have found statistically significant results, well above chance. It's curious, actually. You can read about this in this paper by Ray Hyman I've cited here, which I'll make available for our unit on ESP. Um, what happened was that Soule was accused of fraud. His research assistant set out to prove there was no fraud and ended up finding evidence for fraud. Soule had basically shifted numbers around in these number tables that he used to indicate, hits versus misses and whatnot. So Soule had actually faked. The Rhines didn't fake their research results, but some, like Soule, did, right? And that's not that fakery doesn't occur in other sciences. I mentioned, well, earlier when we were talking about conspiracy theories and we mentioned vaccines and autism, right? Obviously, we don't have time to go into this in super detail. But that study, that initial study, which claimed that there was a link between autism rates and the MMR vaccine by Andrew Wakefield, he made that up. Like he made that data up. And the journal that published that paper, I believe it was the Lancet, retracted the paper, and Wakefield lost his medical license. you know. So now he's out there making money by being an anti-vax speaker. But yeah, he faked it. So yeah, this is not exclusive to parapsychology. It does unfortunately happen in other sciences. Some thought, barring cases of fraud, we could still address some of the methodological problems by getting developing better research tools. So experimenters shifted away from Zener cards to more emotionally charged or emotionally meaningful symbols. A guy named Bem, I forget his first name, but Bem, his last name is Bem, B-E-M. He's actually a psychologist who was at Harvard, did this, and he claimed to have evidence for people's precognitive abilities. Um, but only when the images were sexually explicit. So like what's going to come up, in the image, and he claimed that people would know if there was a raunchy, sexy picture that was about to appear before them on the computer screen. Like pictures of people engaged in poses like you see on like those romance novels, right? Again, not replicable. This Daryl Bem. Good. Thank you, Holly. Yeah, Daryl Bem. So in that vein, right? People have used this more emotionally charged stuff to study telepathy. When it comes to the study of PK, we shifted away from like dice throws, and we started to see if people could influence random number generators. right? And the idea there was that um, true random number generators use a naturally occurring, truly random process like radioactive decay, um, which is a quantum process, a quantum mechanical process. And the idea was that it's called micro PK. The idea is that the mind affects what happens at that level of the natural world, the quantum level, the very small. It doesn't, again, for reasons we'll talk about when we discuss ESP and PK. But that was the idea, is that consciousness collapses the wave function, and all of that sort of quantum jargon. Um, a little bit closer to the present, an interesting method of investigating psi abilities was developed called Ganzfeld experiments. That's from the German, that means whole field. So the Ganzfeld is the whole field. And what is the Ganzfeld? Well, you put on some headphones, and the headphones could just block your hearing or maybe play white noise. Then they put two sort of like half ping pong balls over your eyes and put a red light on in the room so that you just see kind of like a uniform pink field and hear white noise, almost like a sort of sensory deprivation experience. And so that's if you're in the Ganzfeld, you're the receiver, and a sender tries to communicate something to you. Then when you're removed from the Ganzfeld, you have to pick from amongst a selection of objects or pictures of objects what was the object that the sender was sending. Now, when we use computers to choose the stimuli that the sender sends, so a computer maybe has a list and it randomly picks, I don't know, a picture of a dog. So now the sender has to send the picture of the dog. And then when you get out of the GANs field, the receiver has to guess from amongst the same set of images which picture did the sender have to send, right? We call those auto Gansfeld because it's a computer selecting the stimuli and not a person. If the person picks the stimuli, they might unconsciously or non-verbally signal the answer to the person, right? And there was a fellow until recently, I don't know if he's still around, Persinger, Dr. Persinger, who was at Laurentian University in Sudbury, who used to use this technique. I remember actually seeing him on documentaries on unsolved mysteries and psychic powers and whatnot. And when I was a little kid, I thought it was quite compelling, but um, now I would characterize Gansfeld experiments as pseudoscientific apparatus. I don't think the idea is that by being in the Gansfeld, you quiet the conscious mind and allow yourself to access your latent psi abilities, which, okay, sounds interesting on the face of it, but again, we don't have many significant results, and those that we do have, we can't seem to replicate. So it doesn't seem like there's anything going on there, right? Parapsychologists will nonetheless maintain that their hit rates are above chance and serve as evidence for psi phenomena. Skeptics will say no. If we conduct a meta-analysis, for example, and that's looking at lots of different studies, so not an individual study, but dozens or perhaps even hundreds of studies, they reveal that the hit rates are actually just due to chance. So, if we were to do a meta-analysis of a bunch of studies, like let's say we just looked at Rhine's, the Rhine's data from their book, Extrasensory Perception, and we have an average hit rate of 7.1. That seems like a big deal. But imagine we took all of that data and all of the other data from all of the other researchers and look at the average hit rate then, it might fall to chance levels. That would be an example of doing a meta-analysis, right? We also find that the effect sizes are quite small. Anybody ever take a statistics class in university? Learn about effect size? Finished 3,000 in winter. Yeah, I took one well, it was actually part of my PhD program. And I'll be honest, I forget. I'll forget what its effect size is, but I think it's got Something to do with how your the the extent to which you can attribute the dependent variable to the manipulation of the independent variable or something. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong though. Because I did statistics in the PhD. I did an empirical study for my PhD, and then I haven't really touched it. Although I will this year because we're doing our little study and we're going to look at belief change, right? Everybody don't forget to complete that participation element if you want to. Yeah, but somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that, okay? Um, right. The replication problem is another problem, right? Um, a lot of the exciting results we fail to replicate. Oh, thank you, Holly. Yeah, the magnitude. Okay, so yeah, how much the predictor influences the outcome and whether that's significant. If you get like if you have some experimental manipulation and this is why we talk all about p-values, which I do remember the p-values, but you're deciding, like okay, so what am I going to accept as due to chance or not, right? And so a statistically significant result means that it was probably not due to chance within, what how you've set up your p-value, right? I like the way Martha put it, measures the magnitude of the relationship between the variables. Yeah. Yeah, actually, Kaya, I was thinking that that's what we would do for our final class is that I would analyze the data. There isn't really that much data. Like, I haven't collected information on, like, all I've done is ask you about the belief in the paranormal scale and about um, your sort of level of familiarity with the dimensions of that scale. So I thought, it would have been interesting to collect some more demographic data like age, gender, what your major is. But then I thought, no, then I'm getting into like where it would be becoming an actual study, and that would have to go through ethics, and I'm not going to be bothered with that. But what we can do is see how average belief levels and knowledge levels change. And I can kind of walk you through the analysis that I do. And I was thinking that that would be kind of interesting. And then maybe we could all talk about why we think we're observing the results that we are observing. So yeah, that's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna look at the initial survey and the later survey, and we're gonna look at what changed and talk about why. All right. Next slide. Oh yeah, Susan Blackmore, right? There are some parapsychologists who have just abandoned the project straight up. One of those is Susan Blackmore. She is now a skeptic and a psychology professor. Um, but after 10 years of null results, she finally gave it up. Although she's still a very interesting character, okay? As you can tell by her really neat hair, right? Um, I remember, again, one of these documentaries that I would see on unsolved mysteries or whatever. Blackmore would often be interviewed in those as a sort of skeptic, but with an inside look. And in one of those documentaries, I remember she told the audience about her first paranormal experience, which was apparently an out-of-body experience where you have the sort of experience of leaving your physical body. This happened to her, I think, when she was a university student and she was with friends smoking weed. um, and has an out of body experience. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Um, I certainly have never had an out of body experience. But I always thought it would be neat to have one. That's definitely an anomalous psychological state, which I think probably has a naturalistic explanation. Um, But that's what got Blackmore interested in studying the paranormal. And then she went on to study like things like micro PK abilities, the ability to affect quantum mechanical processes, and just did not find anything after 10 years of looking. Yeah. Yeah, must have been strong stuff. Um, there's a link in the slide here, a little article she wrote detailing her sort of crisis of faith, we'll call it, in parapsychology. Other skeptics, though, kind of come at it from the outside. So um, most of these tend to be magicians. And again, I'm not trying to be facetious here, but I did in the previous points, I was drawing a little bit from Ray Hyman's paper, who we'll take a look at more later. He's a psychologist, or he was. But when he was in graduate school, he was a mentalist. He took up palm reading. And initially, he believed that he was actually doing something, like that palm reading was actually a legit means of divining information about a person. Until somebody, maybe it was one of his professors or a colleague or somebody, said to him, like, why don't you do a palm reading, but with your next person, just tell them the opposite of everything that it indicates and see what happens. So he did that, and his customer said to themselves, "Oh my God, you're so right." Even though he said the opposite of what all of his palm reading manuals would have directed you to say, based on where your lines are and everything, right? So he became a skeptic and did a lot of work on what we would call anomalistic psychology now. Um, Other magicians, Harry Houdini was famously skeptical, especially of mediums who claimed to be able to communicate with the dead, as was James Randi. James Randi famously orchestrated Project Alpha, where he there was this newly initiated parapsychology lab that had been started up somewhere in the United States, and Randy recruited two magicians, one of whom is Banachek, who I've mentioned here, who's a mentalist. Recruited these magicians to go in and act like they were psychics, um, and they very convincingly convinced the experimenters that they had powers. Um, until it was revealed that they were doing simple magic tricks. Penn and Teller, who I've actually seen perform live. The big tall guy and the shorter guy who never talks. Um, they incorporate mentalism in their acts, but they tell you, we're lying to you. We are fooling you. We are fooling you for entertainment purposes, right? Darren Brown from the UK, another example, right? All of these people perform acts of mentalism, which is apparently psychic or telekinetic phenomena, but they're accomplished with, some kind of trick or effect that the audience doesn't understand. But none of this involves anything paranormal, right? So, although there are the more academic skeptics like Hyman and Blackmore, the more visible antagonists of paranormal research are those like James Randi, right? It's the magicians. I've got a little clip from his documentary Secrets of the Psychics here, where you can go and see him demonstrate how to bend metal objects with trickery rather than mental powers, right? And maybe you've heard of other techniques like cold reading, hot reading, misdirection, force choices, or forcing. These are all sort of tricks of the trade that magicians can use to create apparently magical effects um, without doing anything actually magical, right? Um, so maybe we'll talk more about this when we talk about ESP and mediumship and so on. And so, as we'll see as we get further and further on into the material, parapsychology is largely considered a pseudoscience. There are lots of reasons. We've looked at some today. We will look at more as we keep going. And it's been sort of replaced by anomalistic psychology, although anomalistic psychology hasn't really caught on because it, I think a lot of people think it's not as interesting. I think it's interesting, but I think a lot of people have the impression that anomalistic psychology is sucking the fun out of things. Because what anomalistic psychology does is try to explain weird phenomena naturalistically. And people don't want that. People want there to be a little bit of mystery and a little bit of magic. In any case, the term was coined by an anthropologist in the 70s named Robert Westcott. And according to Jones and Zisney, whose paper I had you read, anomalistic psychology is concerned with claims that certain psychological phenomena are inexplicable in terms of orthodox science. The explanations that are offered instead violate one or another of the basic limiting principles of naturalism. Anomalistic psychology applies the scientific method to all such claims and shows that either the phenomenon in question can be explained in naturalistic terms, including the explanation that it is a non-phenomenon, or that the phenomenon or some aspect of it cannot be given an adequate scientific explanation at the present time. So, in some ways, this is kind of like a full circle sort of moment, acknowledging that something strange is going on and that there is a natural explanation for it is very much in line with the goals of some of the early psychical researchers. But at the same time, those psychical researchers got taken for a ride by some fraudsters, a lot of mediums, and also ghost photographers. The when the SPR was formed, this was the late 19th century, and photography was still quite new. Um, and so it was not really understood, by lay people, by non-photographers. Things like camera artifacts or overexposures, stuff like this, stuff that we all know about now that we all have cameras in our pockets. This was not common knowledge back then. So it was very easy to take a photograph, like an overexposed photograph, to make it look like there's a ghost standing behind you. And people thought that, oh, well, this is clearly physical evidence of some physical phenomenon, right? None other than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes books, right? Well, they weren't books at the time. It was published in a magazine, but Sherlock Holmes, um, rational, extremely logical. Everything is about deduction, right? Um, Conan Doyle was a spiritualist. I mean, Conan Doyle was taken in by the Cottingley fairies. And you can Google this, actually. It's quite funny. The Cottingley fairies, another bit of fraud. Again, photography was new, and this guy with a camera had the idea of taking pictures of tiny little figurines of fairies in the garden and presenting it as evidence that fairies were real. And Arthur Conan Doyle believed it. So yeah, photography was new, and it was easy to fool people with it. Um, mediumship. We didn't understand things like the ideomotor effect, which we'll talk about later in the class. So very easy to fool some of these people who were, genuinely believed that there were actual phenomena there that were worthy of study. And anomalistic psychology says, okay, maybe there are weird things going on, but we can either explain them naturalistically or admit that, we just don't have a complete scientific understanding yet. But that doesn't mean that it's supernatural or paranormal, right? I'll briefly end off with a little bit of a discussion of one of my favorite humans ever, and that's Carl Sagan, who said in his book Broca's Brain and in his book and television series Cosmos that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I think that claims of paranormal phenomena are definitionally extraordinary claims. So we need extraordinary evidence, right? I mean, impressive claims are made all the time in science. Um, and if those claims are worked out to be true, if our theories represent the way reality seems to work, that's because we've got really good evidence for them. It's not the same in pseudoscience. Then again, there's a problem here, and that's how we differentiate between the two, right? What is the difference between a science and a pseudoscience? We call this problem the demarcation problem, and there's lots of different ways we could go about answering it. Probably, if you take a philosophy of science class, you'll no doubt discuss this problem and certain answers to it. You'll cover the logical positivists, you'll cover Karl Popper, Thomas Kuhn, all kinds of thinkers. So we're not going to try and solve it today, but I'm going to give you instead a practical guide for trying to identify the difference between science and pseudoscience, which comes from Carl Sagan's book, The Demon Haunted World. Sagan called it his baloney detection kit, and it has certain tools which will be helpful, not just in a class like this, but in everyday life, right? One of the tools is to make sure that whenever possible, there is an independent confirmation of the facts. You know, um, it's not enough to say, I saw a ghost. Like, okay, can I see the ghost? Can I confirm that there's a ghost there? If there is a ghost, I should be able to, right? I should be able to independently confirm whatever claim you are making. We should encourage substantive debate on the evidence by knowledgeable proponents of all points of view. And that's what we're doing here, really. We're getting all of our all of us together, experts and believers, and we're going to engage in debate on the nature of the evidence for the claims that we're looking at. Avoid arguments from authority. Why? Authorities have made mistakes in the past, and they will do so again in the future. Um, I like what Sagan says here. Perhaps a better way to say it is that in science, there are no authorities. At most, there are experts. I like this. Argument from authority is what you get, like in religion. And again, I'm not trying to disparage religion here, but there's a reason why appeal to authority is an informal fallacy, right? What happened recently in religious news? We got a new well, I didn't. I'm not Catholic, but Catholics got a new pope, right? From Chicago, of all places. So what's the pope do? Any Catholics know what the pope does? Or maybe you're not Catholic and you know what the pope does. He does a lot of things, a lot of important things. Anybody know? Yeah, he's like the boss. Yeah. Well, so technically he's a head of state, right? Vatican City is a state. It's a country. And so the Pope is the head of that state. And he's in charge of Catholics, right? He's the leader of the church. He is the head guy in the tradition of, like all the popes going all the way back to Peter, right? Yes, he has a big hat. All the other guys don't have a hat as big as his. He has the biggest one. He's God's representative on earth, right? If you're Catholic, you believe that the Pope represents God's will on earth. So he's an authority. So, he might change a rule, you know. He didn't do this, but some Pope did somewhere at some time. He said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have Mass in English or whatever language. We're not going to do it in Latin anymore. That's authority, right? Or when the Catholic Church finally said, okay, we accept evolution, we accept that the earth revolves around the sun. Sorry about all that stuff we did. Sorry about Galileo's house arrest, et cetera, et cetera. That's the Pope who does that, and that's an authority. So or like even, back in the day, um, what was it? You didn't eat meat on Friday? Or what day was it that you didn't eat meat? Yeah, Fridays. Now it's okay. Why? because the Pope said it was, right? Yeah, fish. You had to have fish. I don't know why. I guess because Friday, Jesus dies and then comes back later. I don't know. I thought it was just an Easter thing, but I guess it used to be all Fridays, right? So that's an argument from authority. Um, that's fine for religion, but as Galileo said, the Bible tells you how to get to heaven, not how the heavens go. So if we're going to be methodological naturalists, um, and we're going to do science and philosophy, we need to realize that appeal to authority is just not good enough. Um, Spin more than one hypothesis. If there's something to be explained, think of all the different ways in which it could be explained. Then think of tests by which you might systematically disprove each of the alternatives. What survives? The hypothesis that resists disproof in this Darwinian selection among multiple working hypotheses has a much better chance of being the right answer than if you had simply run with the first idea that caught your fancy. And I get it. Like, I've done experimental work before. Sometimes you get an idea and you're like, I really like this idea. It would be really cool if this was true, but it just doesn't work that way. Um, Try and explain uh, things in as many different ways as possible. And then this is actually how science works. We don't prove things to be true. We attempt to falsify them. And if we fail to falsify, we can be reasonably certain that our hypothesis is true. So that's falsificationism. Uh, Related to the previous point, try not to get overly attached to a hypothesis just because it's yours. It's only a way station in the pursuit of knowledge. Ask yourself why you like the idea. Compare it fairly with the alternatives. See if you can find reasons for rejecting it. If you don't, others will. So yeah, you might like your hypothesis, um, but you still need to explore all the alternatives, right? Just because you like an idea because you want it to be true doesn't mean it's true. And this is not just me talking to the believers. This is something scientists have to remind ourselves of, right? Andrew Wakefield with his autism MMR paper, right? Like, I'm sure he'd love it to be true that vaccines cause autism. Um, he wanted it to be true so bad that when the data did not indicate that, he changed the data, right? So it's not just scientists. It's not just paranormal people. It can be scientists too. Although I would say that now Wakefield is in fact not a scientist any longer. Quantify. If whatever it is you're explaining has some measure, some numerical quantity attached to it, you'll be much better able to discriminate among competing hypotheses. What is vague and qualitative is open to many explanations. Of course, there are truths to be sought in the many qualitative issues we are obliged to confront, but finding them is more challenging. So if you can, it's good to quantify things. Um, I could get a little nitpicky with this. Obviously, I think Sagan is right, but also quantifying itself can kind of change our understanding of various phenomena, right? Like and this can also be used to make less scientific ideas seem more scientific, right? You'll see this a lot if you watch those ghost hunter shows. Like Ghost Hunters was one. I think that was the original one. Um, are there other ones? I saw one on Netflix. I watched the first episode and I couldn't watch anymore. But it was called Living for the Dead, right? And it was a bunch of LGBTQ individuals who were also paranormal investigators. I love the title of the show, like we're living for the dead, right? But some of them used crystals and some of them used like EMF readers. The same thing on Ghost Hunters. What are some other? There's got to be other ghost shows. I can't be the only one who's seen these, right? Come on, you're in a philosophy of the paranormal class. You've got to have seen a ghost hunting show. BuzzFeed Unsolved. Okay. Oh yeah, like I've seen clips of that. Oh, Ghost Adventures. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the BuzzFeed has balance. That's good. Yeah. So Ghost Adventures, did they use an EMF meter there? It's a little meter that reads electricity. Which is the one with Demi Lovato? Is that BuzzFeed? Is that Living for the Dead? Or which one is that? Oh, Spirit Box. Yeah. Oh. Okay, wait, what? Which so in which one does Demi Lovato sing to ghosts? Is that the one I only saw the one episode of? I didn't stop watching it because it was hosted by queer people or anything. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I stopped watching Living for the Dead because it was pseudoscientific. Unidentified. Oh, okay, that's a new one. I'm gonna have to check that out. Um, so when they use the EMF meter, right, it gives the appearance of like using a scientific instrument, right? But here's the problem. Um, why should ghosts be detectable by an EMF meter, right? Either ghosts are non-physical, in which case they shouldn't be picked up by an EMF meter at all, or they are physical and we could probably come up with a better means of detecting them than a tool that's used to measure electromagnetic fields. So, yes, quantification is good. Measuring, okay, I'm getting a spike in electromagnetic radiation here, and this is the room where the ghost was. So maybe that's the ghost. Okay. You do want to quantify whenever possible in science, but it can also kind of be used by pseudoscientists to make themselves look more scientific. And that's why they use EMF meters. That's why they use spirit boxes because it looks more scientific than using crystals or tarot cards or pendulums or dowsing rods or something, right? But really, it's the same thing. It's still pseudoscientific. Um, if there's a chain of argument, every link in the chain must work, including the premise, not just most of them. Philosophers should know this. We want our arguments to be valid and sound. An argument is valid if it follows a proper logical structure. There are no logical fallacies. You have your universal premise and all your other premises, and the conclusion follows from the premises. Okay, that's a valid argument. And your argument is sound if all of the information it contains is true. So you want your argument to be valid and sound. That's kind of what Sagan is saying here. Occam's razor, this convenient rule of thumb, urges us, when faced with two hypotheses that explain the data equally well, to choose the simpler. There are a couple of different formulations of Occam's razor. One is the sort of one you hear like more everyday, right? In the sort of everyday formulation, the simplest answer is usually the correct one. That is in itself a bit of an oversimplification of Occam's razor, but what William of Occam meant, uh, well, what he wrote was do not multiply entities beyond necessity. And that's kind of the more academic reading. And what that means is that you should rely on as few unnecessary assumptions as possible. That's really what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean it's simpler, but you want the fewest unnecessary assumptions. So the example I like to use here is the Ptolemaic model of the solar system versus the Copernican model of the solar system, right? The Ptolemaic model is geocentric, Copernican is heliocentric. It was the Copernican model that led to our present understanding of the solar system. Um, Ptolemy's model involved the Earth being at the center and the sun and the moon and the other planets orbiting the Earth, and then to explain the retrograde motion of the planets. And we'll talk about this when we talk about astrology. Ptolemy actually posited that the planets actually move on these invisible crystal spheres. So it's like a planet sitting on an invisible planet that turns as it orbits the sun. And that accounts for retrograde motion, where throughout the year we'll see a planet, over the months appear to change places in the sky and then go backwards for a bit and then go forwards again. Um, Copernicus's model actually did not explain the motions of the planets any better than Ptolemy's. They both worked equally well. The reason it didn't do any better is because Copernicus didn't realize that the planets don't orbit in circles, they orbit in ellipses. It took a little while later. Johannes Kepler and Tycho Brahe had to finish that up, had to figure that out. So the Copernican model actually didn't work any better than Ptolemy's, but it was simpler because it didn't rely on the assumption that there were these invisible crystalline cosmic spheres that planets were sitting on. That was just simpler. And that's actually why it replaced Ptolemy's model, not because it was better, because it was simpler. Um, but the proper reading, I think, is that you should not multiply entities beyond necessity. So don't make any unnecessary assumptions. Only assume what you have to. Always ask whether the hypothesis can be, at least in principle, falsified. I won't read the whole thing, but yeah, that's how science works. Science used to be observational, almost purely observational, right? From the ancient Greek natural scientists like Thales and his students who studied the natural world up until Bacon, right? Francis Bacon, who is quoted at the beginning of this chapter from Sagan's book. Science was observational. You had to just go out and look, right? Aristotle was also something of a scientist, but he, and he kind of struck a balance between experimentation and theorizing. Um, but the key thing was to go out and observe and think about it. Then things started to change. Gradually, we started incorporating in experiments to try and verify hypotheses. And I think verificationism really came to a head with the like logical positivism and the Vienna Circle, right? How do you know what's true? Well, you have to be able to put it into a sentence about the world, a proposition, and then you have to be able to check whether that proposition is true. We don't actually do it that way because Karl Popper, a collaborator and critic of the Vienna Circle, the members of the Vienna Circle said, no, what scientists actually do is they try and falsify things. So they come up with a claim about the world, a hypothesis, which may or may not be true, and then they try and disprove it. And if they can't do that, then we can be reasonably sure that our hypothesis is correct. And that's how science works, right? So that's really all I have to say for today. I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about, what the paranormal is. We've talked about the supernatural. We've talked about various paranormal phenomena, everything from telepathy and psychokinesis to ghosts, haunted houses, aliens. Um, we've talked a little bit about the rise and fall of parapsychology. So I think it really was an earnest attempt at getting a new experimental science going to try and stem the sort of problems with psychical research and to see if there was anything really going on. Unfortunately, parapsychology succumbed to the very tendencies that it was trying to get away from in terms of, separating from psychical research. And it is pretty much a pseudoscience. It's something that kind of looks and sounds scientific, but which really isn't scientific. Um, it's kind of been replaced by abnormal psychology, but um, There are not, I don't know. It never really caught on. In the 70s and 80s during the New Age movement, there was still a lot of interest in parapsychology, and there were still parapsychology research programs at universities. I can only find one parapsychology course being taught at an English-speaking university now, and it's actually offered at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And it is a course very much like this one, where I'm not teaching you how to be a parapsychologist. Rather, we're critically examining its claims and its methods, right? So parapsychology is kind of dead, but anomalistic psychology hasn't really taken off. I've made a typo here. This is not abnormal psychology. Abnormal psychology is the study of abnormal psychological states like mental illness or addiction, right? That's abnormal psychology. Anomalistic psychology is the study of really weird psychological states like, I don't know, lucid dreams, out of body experiences, stuff like that. Um, Ostensive instances of ESP, right? And I've introduced you to some tools for your baloney detection kit, which you should use everywhere, not just in this class, not just on claims related to the paranormal. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's political misinformation. There's misinformation in like medicine, right? Like, notice how everybody's mad. Everybody's afraid of seed oils now. You guys notice that? Yeah, I'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, everybody's worried about seed oils. Ought we really be that worried about seed oils? Probably not. It's probably not the oils themselves, but the fact that they appear in lots and lots of processed food. Same with black plastic, right? Everybody was kind of panicked about black plastic cooking utensils, um, about how these might introduce toxic chemicals that are, that maybe too many of these chemicals. Um, it turns out there was a typo in that original paper where they multiplied the number wrong. So yes, black plastic cooking utensils do leach chemicals into food, although not nearly at the levels that were initially claimed. Like Kaya says, I need people to tell me seed oils are bad to tell me what an inflation marker is, and then we'll listen to them. Um, what's that? An inflation marker? Is that an economic term? Or is that inflammation in the body? What does that mean? Oh, your body. Oh, I see. So like something that can inflame your joints and stuff. Yeah. I thought maybe you were saying like, oh, seed oils are cheaper than olive oil and inflation is really bad, so people are consuming more seed oils and maybe that's bad. I totally did not understand what you meant. I mean, by all means, use olive oil. It's good for you, but seed oils are probably not the biggest worry you have. Um, yeah, I think they have no idea. I mean, most people who say that probably also drink alcohol, which is like a huge cause of inflammation. Yeah, that's right. Bananas are also radioactive. Interesting. The potassium in bananas is radioactive, so. But whether it's radioactivity, black plastic, seed oils, it's the dose that makes the poison, right? So to answer Leo's question, yeah, I think I will probably extend that a little bit too. Maybe I'll give you guys the weekend to work on that. Yeah, Holly, you're right. Potatoes have potassium. I mean, anything that grows in the ground is going to have some radioactivity because in the ground there are some little bits of radioactive stuff. Some more than others. Bananas and Brazil nuts are highly radioactive. But again, it's not going to kill you. Um, Yeah, you're going to be fine. Yeah, Kaya, good point. Yeah, and that's the reason why that works, Bell, is because of the electrolytes in the potato. Not because I'm not saying you're because of the radioactivity, but yeah, potatoes have electrolytes. So these are negative ions, and if you plug wires into them and connect them to a little light bulb, they'll travel through the wire and light up the light bulb. Same thing with lemons. And yeah, Kaya makes a good point about the this shaming the pharma industry. I mean, I'm not going to like obviously, big pharma is has gotten up to some real shady stuff. But yeah, it's actually not as big as the wellness industry. The wellness industry is by far larger than the pharmaceutical industry. Like we're talking billions of dollars larger, which is very interesting. So next time someone says, I'm not going to take that drug because of big pharma, it's like, well, okay, but the alternative is what? Really expensive essential oils? I don't know. Like, or like Leo says, the detox stuff. Exactly. You want to know how to detox? Have a liver. All of you have one. So congratulations, you've completed Dr. Redstone's medical detox wellness program. Um, Yeah, I think for the reflection paper, probably three or four, three or four, up to you, but three or four. Um, and again, I just want snapshots of your work. So, right, and by the way, I'm going to give you, don't start just yet, or if you start, just keep this in mind. I will have a template, and the template will actually have specific instructions, as well as a sort of like mini rubric to tell you how me and Zainab and Jack, the teaching assistants, it'll tell you like kind of like how we're going to evaluate it. Like I'll tell you like an A will be like this, a B will be like this, a C will be like this, etc. So you can start, but keep in mind that you're going to want to put it in that template, which will also have the instructions. And I will give you an extension at least until Monday, maybe a bit later. But yeah, I kind of want to push things back because I'm still like I wasn't the sickest I've ever been, but it did really make me tired. Um, and of course, I was already very tired from marking everything from the winter semester. So yeah, stomach flu is a bummer, and the bad thing is I made everybody else sick. So the in-laws are in Toronto now, taking the stomach flu with them. So my bad. Anyway, that's gross. Let's not talk about that stuff anymore. I had a really fun time today. I feel like finally we're really getting going with this. So this is great. I'd like to see this kind of discussion and engagement as we continue. And now that I'm feeling better, I should be a little bit more chipper. I feel like for the first lecture, I was kind of like, like pretty worn out looking, right? But I feel pretty good now, and I'm really looking forward to tackling everything. So next time, I realize there's a lot of reading for next time. If you have to skip something, skip the first part of Freud's essay. Just read the second and third parts. Jensch is short. Freud is good, but repeats a lot of what Jensch says. Hoffman is great. You've got to read that story. It is so good. Read it at night if you want to really give yourself an eerie feeling, but we'll talk about the uncanny next time. So thanks all. I'll see you on Wednesday. Take care of yourselves. Um, Yes, when we talk about aliens and UFOs, we'll have to discuss, well, the theory and also the show, right? Ancient Aliens. Oh, what a silly show. Okay, bye for now, everyone.